Whenever Tatsuki Fujimoto is brought up, most people bring up their love for Chainsaw Man, and there's a reason for this. It is awesome, no doubt. Unfortunately, that means that many people don't know about Chainsaw Man's predecessor, Fujimoto's dark fantasy manga Fire Punch, a bleak, post-apocalyptic story about identity, rebirth, and destruction. The premise is simple. The Earth has become a frozen dystopia, and those still alive are struggling to survive. Some people, called blessed, have special abilities, and our main character Agni, as well as his sister Luna, are blessed with the power of regeneration, which they use to help feed the people in their village. At the start of the story, a blessed named Doma visits the village and burns the inhabitants alive with his inextinguishable flames. As Luna burns to death in front of her brother, she implores Agni to live. And after 8 years of burning alive and regenerating again and again, Agni is finally able to control his body. Reborn as Fire Punch, he vows to get revenge. I read this 8-volume, 83-chapter manga over the course of 2 weeks, and it's a visceral, raw, and ambitious gem of a story that more people should definitely check out. At first glance, it's set up to be an edgy, dark, and violent seinen, and you wouldn't be wrong for thinking this. We have our main character who is both butt naked and covered in flames. The art is brutal and explosive, lots of destroyed buildings, plenty of blood and guts, and all kinds of bad guys engulfed in fire. This is some top-tier manga action with some really hype moments. However, Fujimoto's Fire Punch is so much more than meets the eye. It's a multi-layered story that challenges you to explore past its shallow surface in order to discover its deeply rich concepts. And this is why I felt so inspired to make this video essay. There's something about Fire Punch that really resonated with me. More unconventional than expected, it's closer in thematic motifs akin to Neon Genesis Evangelion, instead of being an action-packed fight fest like Dragon Ball Z. Ultimately, Fire Punch is an ambitious manga that deserves its day in the sun because though it's presented as a nihilistic action sci-fi, it instead masterfully presents a multi-layered psychological story about identity, overcoming trauma, and the power of love. First and foremost, Fire Punch is a story that explores the concept of identity. Fujimoto starts by weaving a nihilistic story. It's a challenging read because it does not shy away from concepts like cannibalism, incest, and suicide. We get to explore how these concepts directly affect our main character and how they erode his mind, directly leading to his fractured sense of self. Interestingly, Fujimoto utilizes a filmmaking motif to explore this. The introduction of cinephile and wildcard Togata sets up an interesting aspect to Agni's story because Togata serves as a meta character who's filming and directing the events that happen in the manga, and in this way, Fujimoto cleverly reconceptualizes Agni's trauma by making the reader look at the events of the manga as a movie, a glamorized hyperbole of Agni's very real struggle. Agni's devastating loss of his sister is repackaged as an action-packed revenge story. At the beginning, he sees himself as a dumb kid who has been thrown into a terrible situation. Like us, Agni is confused and doesn't really know what's happening around him. With his new abilities and powers, he does not know who he is supposed to be. But as the star of Togota's movie, Agni is forced to adapt to and lose himself in different roles. Over the course of this story, his identity, his sense of self keeps changing to adjust and cope with what's happening around him. He plays many roles throughout the story, from Big Brother to his sister Luna, to the unstoppable hero Fire Punch. Hell, even through Togata's machinations and his growing legend, Agni even plays the role of God. With Togata now directing Agni's struggle, the camera symbolically serves as a thin veil that allows Agni to rationalize his split identities. It serves as a way to keep him sane enough to rationalize his actions. After all, he is only playing a part. He is now an actor. This is important because even with the added aspect of keeping him at arm's length from his struggle, the trauma is still too deep, and therefore he slowly begins to lose his mind, being unable to remember his purpose and the parts he's supposed to play. In a sense, he loses his agency because he no longer has any control. He becomes a rampaging blessed that goes off of instinct, blinded by his pain. Whether perceived as a god by the oppressed slaves or perceived as a devil by the soldiers who confront him, it doesn't matter. Agni loses his sense of self due to the constant trauma he suffers. However, in the end, Agni, with Judah's help, is able to start over. Ultimately, all of his past selves and trauma are erased, and he's given the opportunity to become the person he wants to be. At the end of the story, when Agni is reincarnated with no memories of this trauma or his past sins, we see him sitting in a theater, watching this whole thematic idea come full circle, watching the pieces of his old life that Togata had filmed. Seeing Fire Punch on screen, he realizes that it's a bit gruesome and over the top, but he can't look away. Most importantly, however, he realizes that the movie doesn't seem to have a point. It makes little to no sense. There's lots of trauma, lots of pain, and lots of suffering. However, he also sees a man who keeps on burning through the entire duration of the film, in spite of it all. And there's something important in that. This is a meta look into Agni's struggle. It showcases a sense of the hopelessness and randomness of suffering in life, how nihilism prevails in our very human lives. It can at first glance be seen as a depressing realization, a depressing story, how all the suffering one goes through serves no real purpose other than to just be suffering. But the fact that we see Fire Punch continue to move forward, no matter the struggle or sense of hopelessness, is a strong allegory for never giving up. And this ties perfectly with the other important theme to Fujimoto's Fire Punch. It's a story about overcoming depression, about overcoming suicide. Throughout the 8 volumes, Agni tries to kill himself many times. Even after Agni is reborn without his flames and pretends that Judah is his sister Luna, even after he creates a new family to take care of, he exhibits real-world signs of depression. He can't sleep, food doesn't have a taste anymore, and he only smiles by faking it. As already stated, besides having the multiple identities to subdue the pain of his life, he lives in absolute anguish. Agni's name itself can be argued to be a play on the word agony, which is the perfect description for this character. He's forced to endure constant pain, being engulfed in flames that never stop. His body is so good at regeneration that he's in a constant flux of death and rebirth. Pain like that can make anyone go insane, which further strengthens his fractured identities. And speaking to identity, before Agni becomes Fire Punch, he sees himself as firewood, basically fuel to keep others like the villagers and his sister alive. In a world full of rapists, starvation, and endless cold, death seems like a great reprieve from the horrors of staying alive. But Agni's purpose to live outweighs his want to die. He keeps moving through the pain and anguish because he lives for others. He forces himself to find purpose. When Doma kills everyone in the village, Agni loses this part of himself. His tether to this world is severed. He loses the person he cares about most in this world. He loses his sister Luna. There is something peaceful in just letting go in that moment, in dying so he can finally be in heaven with his parents and his sister, no longer cold and hungry. But Luna's last words to him are live, and this word ignites his fuel to keep going. Again, it cannot be overstated just how much pain Agni is in at all times. Something that drives his depression. Physically, the pain of burning alive makes it hard for him to think and speak. Emotionally, he's alone, confused, and numb. He tries to be a hero because he thinks that is what Luna would have wanted, but he ends up becoming worse than Doma by directly and indirectly being responsible for the death of hundreds of people. He loses Togata when he was starting to develop a kinship to her and when he saw as an older sister. He even loses all the slaves and people that he saved. He couldn't save Luna as Agni, he couldn't save Togata as Fire Punch, he couldn't save his followers as their god. Time and time again, Agni fails, so he is consumed by guilt and feels an overwhelming sense of self-hatred. But no matter what, he forces himself to keep moving, to keep living, and to find purpose, until ultimately his pain stops. Fire Punch is depressing, but it ends up showing us that no matter what hardships we face, in Agni's case, extreme as they may be, if one can keep finding reasons to live, then ultimately we can become whoever we want and eventually find happiness. And honestly, the main thing that kept Agni moving forward through all of the pain was love. How the power of love can transcend time, space, memory, death, reincarnation, and even universal decay. Fire Punch presents a multi-layered story. The material is dark, but this enriches the context. It better highlights the poignant and bittersweet catharsis of the characters. Identity can be manipulated, but it can also adapt to any hardship. Thoughts of suicide can be prevalent in life, but things can get better. A small nugget of hope can be found in hopelessness. Agni's sense of hope, no matter how fleeting, is fueled by the love that he has for his family, the love that he has for Luna and Judah. A concept that is challenging, but also refuses to die, that adapts and evolves until Agni and Luna aren't really Agni and Luna anymore. After experiencing this manga, I believe that Fire Punch is an ambitious story with challenging concepts. And at its core, it's a story about love, a story about soulmates. Even after all the pain, the hardship, and the agony, even after millennia, Agni and Luna still find a way to each other. Even in the impossible reaches of oblivion, they still find a way to be together in the end. Thank you, Tatsuki Fujimoto. This is a manga worth experiencing.